Good morning. This is the first episode of Naanstradamus, wherein I tell you what the future will bring based off of my understanding of the present and the past. It's most likely to be inaccurate, and yet it might provide some insight, with the intent being to create a more ideal future, a better future, to counter the forces of empire and support the forces of freedom and liberty. As we all know, government exists as the antithesis of freedom, and therefore, the less government there is, the more freedom there is, and the more the power in lies with non state actors, the better it is for Naanstradamus. So here goes. We've got a new administration coming into power in the empire. First, I want to talk about the present situation. What's going on right now? Well, the Zionist entity made a ceasefire with Hezbollah, which is the non state actor which defends the people of Lebanon. There's also a government in Lebanon, but it serves the empire and is against the people of Lebanon and against Hezbollah. So, simultaneously with the ceasefire with Hezbollah, there has been uh, aggression, a new front opened against the people of Syria, in northern Syria, around Aleppo. So, this agenda was that of the Zionist entity, which, under the Obama administration, created and labeled itself as ISIS, its proxies as ISIS, and took all these weapons from the empire's more governmental forces in Iraq and then transferred them to their terrorist proxies. I'm not so good at that. I heard the other day someone saying the word terrorist by rolling both R's, and there's like a R and then a or and then a R, and it's really hard for me to say, so I can't do it, but I tried. A for effort. So, this is not just an event, but a trend. What it means is that the war is back on to depose Assad and to conquer Syria. The Zionist aggression and war against Syria has resumed. And it also means that Erdogan in Turkey is no longer a wild card. He likes to play both sides, but he's chosen his side. His side is that of the empire. Of course, the Ottoman Empire got conquered by the British Empire, and ever since, there's been no leader in Turkey that actually represents the people. The leader is just is a puppet of the empire, and they have to, just like every puppet in the positions of government, they have to manage the public perception so that the public doesn't rebel against them. So, under the leadership of Erdogan, the inflation rate in Turkey has been like double, triple digits for I don't know how long. I didn't actually look this up. This is just off the top of my head. I will look it up and add the exact rate. The average over the last 10 years, I think he's been leader for at least 10 years. The average inflation rate over 10 years, if I had to guess off the top of my head, I would guess it's been 20%, which means that over 10 years, the people have had their currency has lost value. Like if you had $100 10 years ago of value, now you're probably down to about $5 or $10. So the empire has probably stolen about 80 to 90% of the value of the Turkish people in 10 years, and yet these people are so brainwashed, and Erdogan is doing such a successful job at subjugating them that they don't even rise up against him. He's good at rhetoric, but then doing absolutely nothing. So he will say rhetoric in support of Gaza when simultaneously he is supplying energy directly and via their proxies in Azerbaijan to fuel the Zionist regime. And simultaneously, he is largely responsible for Azerbaijan gaining territory against Armenia. He denies the Armenian genocide, and so he's completely against Armenia. And yet, the people of Armenia, who for a while were defended by Russia, their government has aligned itself with the empire. So it is just the people of Armenia are just getting ravaged again and again, just like they got genocided before, because they are very poor at intelligence and choosing who their alliances are. So the people of Armenia are giant losers in this game, even though for a while they were doing okay, but not anymore. Azerbaijan is growing at the expense of Armenia, and Armenia has no real allies. It's just a sacrificial pawn for the empire. So returning to Syria, what Naanstradamus predicts is that Tulsi Gabbard will not be the director of national intelligence. Why? Because she is a woman of integrity that stood against the jihad of the Zionist proxies, calling themselves various names, but backed by all of the Zionist puppet states from Turkey to the Arabian ones to directly the Zionist ones right next door to Syria. And so there is now, and there will continue to be renewed offensive against Syria and an attempt at regime change against Assad. A little bit about Assad. Assad did not grow up thinking he was going to be a political leader. That was his older brother, was to be the leader, to inherit power from his father. Assad trained as a doctor. He's a man who dedicated his life to health and to the health of his people, and yet he found himself, after his brother was assassinated by the Zionist entity, as the leader of Syria. Yet he's not one to militarize the populace in order to fight against the Zionist entity, and absent the support of Russia, he surely would have faced the same ends as Gaddafi and Saddam, and would likely, as Gaddafi, found his death being sodomized by a bayonet by a group of Zionist savages. Yet he stands today. And what Tulsi Gabbard did when the Zionist entity was all in on regime change against Assad under Obama, and Obama made his red line that if you gas your own people, we are going to have to intercede and kill you, because that's what we do. We save the foreigners from their evil dictators. It's a big joke, because the U.S. supports all these dictators all around the world in order to subjugate peoples. But because Assad wasn't playing ball with their gas pipelines that they wanted to run, and was instead an ally of Russia, he had to go. And Tulsi, at the time, I was standing with Assad. Not that it means anything, because I'm just nobody and just on social media, saying how there was like a thing about I stand with Rand. When Rand was making a stand, Rand Paul was making a stand against how Obama was using drones to assassinate American citizens. So just one of the unconstitutional capital crimes that Obama committed, and which he should be tried and executed for assassinating Americans. Direct, with knowledge, murder, assassinating Americans. No trial, no no constitutional authority, and the president is not above capital crimes, including murder. And so Rand Paul did a whole filibuster thing about not letting the president assassinate American citizens with drones. And he was the only senator because all of the senators are Zionist puppets and they don't care about the Constitution. And they like for the executive to have the power to assassinate anyone that they choose because the president is always controlled by them. And therefore, if they can kill anyone that stands against them, it makes their ability to achieve full spectrum dominance throughout the globe more achievable, more readily achievable. Because if you just have people who are speaking out against the empire, like the first American that they assassinated with the drones, he was saying things, they didn't like his speech, and so they assassinated him. And then the next one they assassinated was that guy's son. He was a teenager born in Colorado, and because he was son of a man that said things they didn't like, he had to die too. And Obama's press secretary said something along the lines of, well, he deserved it because his dad said things he didn't like, so he killed him. I think in Syria is actually where they killed him too. Anywho, Rand Paul stood against empire for a while, though now he's all for the Zionist agenda. Unfortunately, the apple fell a bit too far from the tree in that example because Ron Paul would never support Zionism or any sort of imperial aggression and has dedicated his whole life to peace and prosperity and no foreign intervention. He's a rare, impeccable gem of a man. So then Tulsi, as the proxies of the empire, called one of their many proxies in Syria called the White Helmets, who, it's like, imagine if you had like first responders that weren't actually first responders, but they were actually terrorists, but they were like trained by Hollywood terrorists, because obviously Hollywood is controlled by the Zionists, and so they would fabricate situations. They would shoot scenes of being like, oh my gosh, look at what's happening, when they would just make the whole thing up. So when Obama made a red line that, oh, well, you can't gas your own people, then the White Helmets went in and made up a false flag attack where they introduced these gas canisters and things, saying that it was the Assad government. Another interesting tangent. How is it that the Assad government, how is it that they are defending their people against Zionism? How is it that they have so much support from their people when they're a government? And I say government is opposed to freedom. Well, the one benefit of government is that it can achieve a degree of collective security, a form of social security. Just like there's social security in the United States, all you have to pay is a certain percentage of your income, and then you get social security. I don't have a social security number because, well, I don't. And therefore, the state cannot identify me because they identify everyone by number. They don't care about life. There's just numbers in their corporate spreadsheet, and everyone's identified by their social security number. And if you don't have a social security number, you can't get an ID, and therefore you can't be identified, nor can you be subjugated by them. So if you associate yourself with a social security number, which most people from a state of a newborn as an infant, they get securitized in the social security system by their parents, and they have this social security number which is stamped on their certification of birth, so that as a baby they are already subjugated by the empire's financial system, and an account is created and credited with $1 million, which then increases the money supply relative to that new person who is a new subject in the financial system. And they assume that they will be able to extract on average $1 million from every individual that's born into that system. And therefore, it's fitting to increase the supply of debt-based currencies $1 million, so that that infant is indebted to that government system that they have been securitized in $1 million from birth. So you start off with a $1 million debt, and the government is quite sure, the Zionist entity is quite sure, that they will extract that $1 million from you over the course of your life because you had the blessing of being born in a Zionist country. And therefore, you're going to have all these financial opportunities, and you're going to pay it right back to the state. You don't really have an option about it. Unless, as an adult, you desecuritize yourself from the social security system, which is the topic of another video, but it's something that without the social security, there is a risk, because that is so freedom and security exist on a spectrum. And if the people, for example, the Syrian people, face threats all around them from Zionist proxies, then the government can be a beneficial thing because it can provide a degree of security. Yet, absent that Zionist threat, the government is only a negative thing. So, if not for the Zionist entity, I would not have anything good to say about the Syrian government, surely. And the Assad's brother would have been in charge, and his brother probably wouldn't have been a person, wasn't a person with the integrity that Assad has. But because of that threat, the Syrian people ended up with a doctor in charge of their government, and because of that threat, their government is the one thing that is protecting them from all of these Zionist proxies that mean to subjugate the people of Syria and replace their secular culture with one of radical Islam that will ensure that they will be essentially subjects of the Zionist entity next door. Syria has a rich and long history of tolerance and coexisting with all different religions, and yet that culture cannot survive the threats of Zionism that surrounds them. And even the Assad government was unable to protect the people of Syria without getting support from external allies, primarily Russia, but also Iran. And through the support of their allies, they were able to prevent the success of the Zionist proxies. And Tulsi Gabbard, to her credit, as a congresswoman, went to Syria and basically stood for peace, stood against the warfare in Syria, stood against the regime change agenda of the Zionist entity. And because the trend now is for a new regime change in Syria, she will not be allowed in any position of power. The entire cabinet of the Trump administration is Zionist. The latest report I've heard is that it's 60% Jewish and 100% Zionist. So the 40% which aren't Jewish are Zionist. And I don't know where Tulsi fits in there. I guess they're saying that she's Zionist because she supports this whole holy war against Islam, and that Islam is the big threat and we have to fight against Islam. And that's a very Zionist type idea. And yet, there's one caveat that this current regime change effort against Assad is under the continuation of the Obama regime, which calls itself the Biden-Harris regime, but it's the same powers behind the Obama regime. And it's possible that if the new administration under Trump actually represents not more war, which is really silly because they're, like I said, they're 100% Zionists, so they're going to support whatever the Zionist agenda is, and the Zionist agenda is the overthrow of Syria, and therefore Naanstradamus' prediction is that Tulsi will not be confirmed as, by the Zionist Senate in the United States, she will not be confirmed as the Director of National Intelligence, because at this point, the Director of National Intelligence is helping to direct the regime change operation going on in Syria. If she is able to become the Director of National Intelligence, it will be a data point that shows that Trump will stand on the right side of history. But the chances of that are about 1%, and it's about a 99% chance that Tulsi will not be confirmed. The sad part of this agenda is that it's the people of Syria that are going to be the next ones subjected to the slaughtatorium of the Zionist regime that the people of Ukraine have been facing, the people of Gaza have been facing, and the people of Lebanon have been facing. So Turkey and Erdogan being a wild card is off the table. They're no longer a wild card. Right now, the biggest wild card and the potential for a country to flip between the Zionist empire and the non-aligned movement, Nostradamus' non-aligned movement, which it's not like the best not moniker, because the sort of like the bricks is the new name for them. Bricks. We like bricks. Bricks are nice. We build things with bricks. You can play with bricks. Building blocks. Bricks are always good, unless they are pre-positioned in riots in cities. Then they're not really good, because like people are rioting and all of a sudden it's like, oh look, there just happens to be pallets of bricks there. Let's use those bricks to go break things. And in the riots around the end of Trump's last administration, which were obviously very well coordinated by the non-aligned movement or BRICS movement or the globalist agenda. I don't know. It gets very confusing. The Soros agenda. There's all these different powers. It gets rather confusing. But we'll take that part back. Cut that out. So, oh yeah. So what's the big new wild card on the global map is Pakistan. Pakistan. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. Pakistan. Pakistan. I'm American. I spell it Pakistan. Anyways, Pakistan. So when Imran Khan was the leader of Pakistan, it was pursuing an independent sovereign agenda. Turns out it's not a sovereign country, and the empire cooed him real quick. And the empire has been in control of Pakistan ever since. And yet, the people of Pakistan have been surprisingly resilient in their support of Imran Khan, who's a very popular leader and who was then jailed by the Zionists. Yet now he's out of jail. I think he's out of jail now. And the people really want him in power, yet the military has taken power, and so it's somewhat similar to Egypt, except that Egypt doesn't have an Imran Khan, and its people have no proclivity to rebel against the Zionist puppet in charge of their government. But the people of Pakistan are showing some incredible spirit, and there is a chance that Pakistan could slip out of the clutches of the empire, but it is highly unlikely, because especially the British are very well rooted into Pakistan, and they require Pakistan to be in their sphere of influence because it's a nuclear country and it is their way of nuking China so that they can at any point just wipe China off the map from Pakistan. And also, it's a bit of leverage over India. Supposedly, Pakistan was in the BRICS or something, and India is also another wild card, and also is Brazil. So it's actually the empire is in a retrenchment position where it could potentially make a lot of advances in like the whole last administration under Biden. The empire has been losing everywhere, bunch of losers. But they're getting a new administration in who is going to be who's going to be like an injection of vitality for the empire, not because it's a vital person, though he seems to have a lot of energy for an old guy, um, but because he is experienced as basically a like a mob boss, basically. So he's experience of being in a position of power and in making deals with rivals so that both can profit, which is kind of what's necessary to be the head puppet of the empire, to be able to represent it and then facilitate those deals and to apply leverage to mostly the allies, applying leverage to the allies in order to further strangle the enemies. Because oftentimes the allies will deal with the enemies because it's in their interest, and it's hard to like leverage the allies because they're your allies. But if you take an approach like Trump, where you start calling your allies your enemies, all of a sudden your allies are like, ah, shit, we can't do anything on our own. We're gonna have to really prove that we're gonna have to bend over even further, and then you can get them to pay more money and change their agenda and stop doing business with these people. And yeah, the overall picture is that China China is going to have to take a stand, but they're not going to want to take a stand. And for that reason, you're going to see the BRIC slash non-aligned movement face a whole series of defeats. That's the Nostradamus prediction. So one of them will be in Syria, unfortunately, and another one will be in Venezuela. The reality in Syria is that guerrillas, like rock paper scissors, guerrillas beat governmental regular armies, and the guerrillas are against the Syrian um, army, and there's not a whole lot the Syrian army can do, and so they're going to continue to get pushed back to Damascus. And if they lose Aleppo, which seems highly likely, then Syria is not really a like Syria's already lost the entire eastern half of the country. The United States is occupying it and working with the Kurds, and so Turkey has this big issue with the Kurds. They really don't like the Kurds. But what obviously has happened is there's a backroom deal that has gone on with Turkey so that they are no longer a wild card, and they'll probably got some sort of security agreements relative to the Kurds so that they won't feel threatened by them. So I'm like losing focus and interest in doing any of this at this point. So that means that I should probably wrap it up pretty soon. So we've got one prediction that Tulsi is going to be pushed out, two predictions that Syria is going to fail as a state, though most likely Damascus will stand. So Syria will just be the city-state of Damascus, and the rest of the whole country will just be Zionist proxies. So there's two predictions for you. The next prediction is in relation to Venezuela. And Trump supported this absurd coup in Venezuela in the first administration. And they're doubling down on that as well. They're going to double down on the Venezuela coup. And being unsuccessful in coupping them, they're going to strangle them in the same way that they strangled Iran. So sanctions, blockading, pretty much what happened to Cuba. And then Cuba, the next prediction for Cuba is the big potential for success for the non-aligned movement, in the same way that there's the Cuban Missile Crisis, but instead of nukes, maybe with some other kind of missiles, so that Cuba can actually break the blockade. And also Cuba could very well play a role like Ansarallah, who I just call the Houthis because that other word is too hard to say. So that's the non-state actors in Yemen who are the champions of anti-Zionism, other than even more so than Russia. Actually, Russia would probably be like the number 2 position of like anti-Zionists. No, scratch that. Iran is definitely number 2 position, but Hezbollah is number 2, I guess. So that's the successful anti-Zionist forces, which then become the targets of the Zionist forces. So under Trump's first administration, he invaded Yemen. They wanted to do some sort of drone strikes, and then Trump's like, no, we'll send in special forces instead. And it didn't work out too well. I think they had some losses, and I don't think they really achieved what they wanted to do. But that's my next prediction, is that there will be a reinvasion of Yemen. That'll probably be one of the first priorities, is going to be to try to figure out Yemen. And because they can't negotiate, they're going to try to use force against Yemen. So the population of Yemen that has previously been genocided by the Zionist empire via their Saudi Arabian proxies, all armed by U.S. weapons, they will be genocided again, and they will just cut them off from food, and they'll try to starve them out and genocide them, just like is going on in Gaza. So the next prediction is that there will be a full genocide of all of the Gazans. They're going to completely ethnically cleanse them until they no longer exist under the Trump administration, and then Israel will annex Gaza. They'll also annex the West Bank, and they'll start the ethnic cleansing campaign in the West Bank as well, so that Israel will have all that territory it's occupying will be annexed and will be recognized as their sovereign territory, because Israel is the sovereign of the Zionist entity. The United States is not sovereign. The United States is subject to Israel as the sovereign. And the Brits they don't necessarily like that it's Israel that's the sovereign, because they have a history where they kind of like where they were the sovereign, and they like to think that they're still in control, really. But you just see how the British royalty was Epsteined, essentially, and you see how it all works. The same thing with well, Charles Charles is inept and just follows the same empirical thing. But it's possible that well, he's been sidelined, actually. So it's possible that a new sovereign could of the UK could actually restore sovereignty of the UK, but it's highly unlikely. They'll just be puppets of the empire as they are. Okay, so next prediction is that, well, if a bridge can be built in Cuba so as to engage the Zionists via Cuba, that could be a huge risk for the Zionist empire. That's the biggest win I can see for the non-aligned movement would actually be in Cuba, and the Cuban people have gone through enough to potentially play that role, but they're also a very soft population, the Cubans, and the homosexual agenda has been very successful in Cuba, whereas that doesn't exist in Yemen. Yemen is a very hard population. They face the genocide. They're very clear about who the enemy is, and they're willing to fight to the death to oppose Zionism, and therefore they're going to be targeted. And so that's the two grounds of the greatest potential successes of the BRICS slash non-aligned movement are in Cuba and in Yemen. And the potential for so these are the other swing states of potential of swinging into the empire's realm of control. The biggest threats are India and Brazil, where there's a chance that Brazil's been kind of going back and forth, and India's kind of always on the fence. And so both of those will be facing a lot of leverage, and because they're not really strong and independent, and they have a history of colonialism and everything, they could possibly be flipped. Okay, so are there any other predictions from Naanstradamus today? Well, I think that'll about sum it up. You can see where the successes of the Zionist empire can be seen. They'll be making their advances in Syria. They'll be making their advances against Venezuela. Oh, Iran. We didn't talk about Iran. Most likely. Most likely the transition between the current administration and the next administration will include a financial crisis, which will be the Zionist entity is going to go all out on creating warfare with Iran, because Iran is in a position where if they, assuming nukes are real and Iran gets nukes, they are going to be able to defend their sovereignty going forward, and therefore there is a narrow window now of the necessity of the Zionist entity to create warfare in Iran, to create regime change, absolute warfare in Iran, and so that's what the short-term agenda is going to be. So we see it start in Syria, and the agenda is going to be to create war with Iran before Trump takes office, and a financial crisis is going to be utilized because they like to create these crises in the transition periods, just like they did when Obama got into power, and then when Obama got out of power. there's these big crises, so that the new administration is like just has to, or they set the precedent with the outgoing administration, and the new administration just has to accept it. So the Zionist entity is going to go all out to create warfare with Iran, and there's probably going to be a financial crisis that helps to exacerbate that. They'll probably even try to blame Iran somehow for this financial crisis, or they'll blame Russia or something. They're going to want to sideline Russia in the way that they sideline Hezbollah, by creating some sort of peace agreement, and applying all possible leverage to ensure that Russia and China do not support Iran as they are waging war against Iran. And because all of this leverage is applied, China will almost certainly not support Iran, and it'll be in their interest to stay neutral. And for a while, for the short term, it'll seem like they're doing well. Their economy will be doing okay, and they'll be growing. But ultimately, they're losing all of their military allies, and they're on the way to getting isolated, because after Iran is defeated and Russia is sidelined, then China becomes the main target. And because they don't have any, it's quite a statement. I'm trying to avoid that statement. Because they are essentially a matriarchal society and not a patriarchal society, they will do whatever is necessary to not take a stand, so as to try to protect their own people. At the same time, they will try to encourage their allies and proxies to take a stand. So it's really a lead from behind type strategy. And when it's faced with the lead from the front type strategy, they will take the submissive position. And so that's what's most likely to happen. And Russia won't, they've already taken their wounds, and if they get a ceasefire, they're going to be happy with that. And if they're introduced back into the global economy and some sanctions are dropped, they're going to be happy with that, so that Iran gets isolated from their allies, and it becomes a full spectrum dominance warfare against Iran by the Zionist entity, while strangulating any of their possible allies. So one wild card in that sense is North Korea, and so they're also going to make overtures to North Korea and flatter them and try to make sure that something unexpected doesn't pop off relative to North Korea. So that's the overall agenda. Africa is out of the picture of the Zionist entity, and doesn't matter too much. They'll probably have some losses in Africa, but it won't really matter. And that's what we have in store for the next 4 years. Now, what does that mean for Americans? It's probably going to lead to an increasingly militarized economy. It's going to lead to more inflation, but inflation plus growth. So it's going to look like everything is going really well. It's going to look like there's a lot of growth, but the inflation is going to be undercutting that growth, and it's just going to be a redirection of economic activity towards the military-industrial complex, and also towards trying to a lot of technological type things, a lot of technological advances, which Elon Musk represents. He's the PR person for the Empire's technological advances, and as well as getting all of that chip production that's really based in Taiwan to reshore that onto the U.S. because they know that they're going to face China in about probably 4 to 8 years. China will become the target. They're going to play some hardball with China. They're going to get China to capitulate, because they don't want to open up warfare with China right now. They're not ready for that, but they're going to prepare for the next 4 to 8 years to be able to lose Taiwan when they do engage with China, and then be able to strangle China next. So there is Naanstradamus's geopolitical analysis. It's really meant to try to provide some perspective, because ultimately my agenda is very out in the open. I'm anti-Zionist. I actually do not tolerate Zionists at all. They're people. I just have zero tolerance for Zionism, and I will likely face a similar. Um, the probabilities say I will face an outcome similar to all the anti-Zionist people who are just like killed savagely and tortured. But in the meantime, it's going to be great. Up until that end point, it's going to be really good because I'm not going to be parasitized by the Zionist entity, and my soul is not going to be corrupted, and I'm going to shine ever brighter as the souls all around me get darker and darker because they're getting dragged into the soulless pit of the Zionist entity. And so it'll shine real bright until there's probably some like supernova type explosion, and then I'll die, and then it'll have a good legacy thereafter. But that's just probabilities. I don't actually believe that. I believe I will succeed against all odds, and I will actually defeat the Zionist entity because I've already faced their. Actually, I'm not going to get into all that. I only need to give so much information. So I've got full faith in the Most High Jah, and that life will prevail and probabilities do not matter because faith is better than reason, and science and reason opposes faith. But that's the journey of the fool. I'm but a fool, and I rely upon faith. And the more information and knowledge that I have, the more faith is required of me, to the point that I seem absolutely foolish. And yet it's just the inability to relate. As you get more faith and you get more knowledge, you become a wizard, and the wizard seems like they're crazy, and yet they're doing these magical things that no one can really understand. So I'm just gonna be a wizard king here, creating creating this anti well, it's not really anti-Zionist, but it is this beacon of a city on a hill, castle on a hill, Castle Stark here. It'll be the king of the north over here, and as the Zionist entity eventually fails because it's a parasite, and it'll eventually destroy everyone that supports it because that's its nature. I will be here unparasitized and representing an alternative, and just as like the Zionist entity is like the caterpillar that's in its final phases, it seemed like it was going into the cocoon phase, but it's not quite done yet. It's gonna eat a lot more leaves first. It's just like it's close. There was the inclination of it's going into cocoon phase with Biden, but it's actually probably going to eat a lot more first. But I could be wrong, and all and Trump in a way is he's a nut in and of himself. It's hard to get down to the middle of him. He's got a hard shell, and it can seem like one thing on the surface, and he can have other things going on underneath. And Trump is actually the biggest wild card. That's why the Zionist entity really fears him. They think that they've got him fully controlled. His cabinet is fully Zionist, but I haven't lost faith in the man. Even though the signs say you shouldn't put any faith in the man, Trump is really the biggest wild card, and he can deliver some stunning truths that the Zionist entity would rather remain unspoken. And yeah, there's a lot of hopeful things, even though there's a lot of chaotic things. And the best thing that the people can do, for anyone who's listened to this far, is to align yourself with the Most High Jah, and to not tolerate Zionism. Zionism, and that whole culture, they will preach tolerance as a virtue, and then they will present the most vile examples of what you need to tolerate. So maybe it starts with the YMCA song, and then it evolves into like transgender, like these freak clown things that are supposed to be like having story time with like kids in kindergarten. It's like the most absolutely absurd and extreme dichotomies. Um, and in between that spectrum, from YMCA to transgender story time, you have the whole abortion agenda, where You have to tolerate that. I'm not even going to get into that because that's really gonna throw off. Because most of the females are completely indoctrinated into that, thinking that the ability to kill their children is masqueraded as a choice over what they can do with their body. When in fact the choice comes when they consent to sexual relations and they conceive of a child. That's where the choice relative to the body is made, and the only time an abortion has any moral justification is if that woman has been raped. If she didn't make that choice to consent to sexual relations and to conceive the child, then she has a right to kill the child because there was no choice involved. But otherwise, even if it means her death, she chose that. That's where the choice is, and that's really hard truth to hear. And because most people are, and a lot of people have already made that choice and they don't want to think about, anyways, that's a really tough one. And it's another one where I started off in one position, and after a lot of revelations I ended up in another position. And that's really the hardest, when it's much harder to convince someone of a truth if they've already been convinced of a lie than it is to convince them of the lie in the first place. But that's what I'm here for, is to give you the hard truth, not to make friends, but to be like a sharpened sword, a sharpened scalpel on behalf of the truth, to be able to separate the truth from the fiction on behalf of the living soul. That if you say such a thing, if you say, here's a sharp sword, a sharp tool of truth coming my way, it seems like a very fearful thing, only because one is perceiving the perception of the parasite. So they have tolerated the parasite, and that has become one and the same with their perspective. And so the fear reaction of the parasite, of the demonic entity that has attached to the individual, sees the light of truth from a place of fear. And so long as the individual associates with that parasite, because they don't have the discernment between the two, their initial reaction will be fear. But in fact, the doctor utilizes the scalpel in order to excise the cancerous tumor, the parasite, from the living being, so as to have a result of health. And so when someone is providing you with a truth that you have a reaction to, or they are helping to course correct one back to the Most High way, the initial response can be recoiling from that, but the conscious entity of their own choice can recognize that that is the medicine that they require, the good medicine that I provide. But ultimately, an even better source of the good medicine is psilocybin, and it will. I'm like an intermediary providing the good medicine, but if you accept the good medicine, you accept psilocybin, and there's other forms. There's peyote, there's ayahuasca. There's many different natural forms of medicine that can cure the individual that has been parasitized, but it requires the choice of the individual, your choice to listen. Up until this point, when I've said all sorts of things that will cause the majority of listeners to recoil, I'm not looking for quantity, I'm looking for the quality of the message. And if this gets through to one single person, then I've achieved my ends, and the value of my time in making the video is worth it, as long as there's one single person that is aided by my message of relative truth. That is the end of this video. I wish you well on your journey from wherever you are now to a more ideal state, which I think is the whole journey of life. There's no end. It's all about the journey of reaching for a more and more ideal state. And so long as we're on the evolving agenda, that's